Now, we've divided our whole theory of guard retention into two major areas. There is a general theory of guard retention in which we look at broad principles and concepts, and we use those to hold someone off who's trying to pass our guard. Now we're going to move to the second section, which is the form of guard retention that most people understand and practice in the world of jiu-jitsu. This is a more specific approach to guard passing, where the idea is I identify what is the actual methodology of guard pass that my opponent is using, and then I focus upon the strengths and weaknesses of that guard pass. I look to solve the central problems that that specific guard pass creates for me, neutralize the threat, and then ultimately put my opponent back in guard and get back into an offensive cycle. There are, in this video, around 7 major forms of guard passes, which are seen most often in modern jiu-jitsu. Variations of these forms of 7 forms of guard pass account for over 90% of the various successful guard passes you'll see in championship competition. And so we want to focus on those. The key idea is that any given guard pass has its, as we said before, strengths and weaknesses. Any given guard pass creates central problems, and if we can identify what the guard pass is, identify the central problems it creates, and neutralize those problems, you're going to stop most of your opponents from passing your guard on most occasions. Looking at a situation where my opponent goes to work, there are many different guard passes that my opponent can go to employ. We've identified a subset of the most popular and the most successful guard passes. We'll be looking at those in the coming chapters. But you can see that your opponent can rapidly change between them. So, for example, he can start with a Toreando pass and then pop up to his feet. And then from here, he could change that to an X pass, a variation of a Toreando, where he can now send my legs through and go in. As I stop that form of guard pass, now he can scoop underneath both of my legs. And from here, go into a very useful form of guard pass, double scoops or double underhooks as they're often referred to. If I feel I'm doing a good job of fighting my opponent off, he can thread hands through, and then from here switch off into an over-under guard pass, where he goes under one leg and over the other, and work from this position. From an over-under, as I go to push him back and go back into Toreando passes and throw my legs by. And there's often a rapid exchange from one form of guard pass to another. What I need to be able to do as the defensive athlete is to identify what form of guard pass is being used against me. I should be able to identify that in a split second. Once I've made the identification, I should have in my mind what are a list of the central features of that guard pass, what are its core strengths and weaknesses. I should be able to negate my opponent's guard pass at those weak areas and then go in and retain my guard. So this is the specific approach to guard passing, very different from the general one that we've been looking at so far. The idea is step number 1, identification. Identify what is the guard pass being used against me. That's going to come down to your ability to learn what these guard passes are. We're going to focus on 7. There are others, but these 7 account for the vast majority of successful guard passes in modern day competition. So we'll focus on them. Step number 1, identify the guard pass. Step number 2, have an understanding of what are the strengths and weaknesses of that guard pass. Step number 3, neutralize the guard pass at its weaknesses. Identify what I need to be able to do to stop that particular guard pass from being effective against me, and then either get back into an offensive cycle, or if my opponent switches to another form of guard pass, make a switch and continue the operation. Identify the guard pass, attack it at its weak points, and get back into an offensive cycle. This is the specific theory of guard passing, and that's where we're going to be turning towards now. Now, we're starting to get into the nitty-gritty of guard defense in a way that you can use in the gym tomorrow as your teammates come in and start passing your guard. We're going to look at 7 main forms of guard pass. Each one has many variations, obviously, but these are the core guard passes used in the modern sport of jiu-jitsu, the ones we've seen most often, which account for most of the guard passes. The one we're going to start with is probably the guard pass we see most often in a fundamentals class. This is the so-called double under guard pass. The idea here is that Mateus recognizes that as long as I have my legs underneath my opponent's arms, there are many forms of offense that I can work from this position. Okay, many of the most popular submissions occur when my legs are underneath Mateus's arms. So, for example, if I can penetrate through, we can go into triangles. From a situation like this, it's not difficult to go across into arm bars. It's a relatively simple thing for us to go into omoplata. And in many ways, fairly simple for us to come up into kimuras, etc., etc. All of these are possible because my legs are underneath my opponent's arms. All that changes when Mateus takes his two arms and goes underneath my legs. Now, triangles become impossible, arm bars impossible, kimuras, omoplatas, all impossible. And so most of my main submission attacks from bottom position are strongly negated by this form of arm positioning. As his arms go underneath my legs, you're left in a situation where he's still technically in guard, he's between your knees, but you don't have any effective means of attacking the head and arms from this position. The few submission holds that are possible from here are a relatively low percentage. They exist, but they're not particularly prevalent in the sport. So my major concern here, if this is not a good attacking position, is to get back to some kind of a good attacking guard. In addition, this is a very strong passing position for Mateus. If he can take one of his hands and go across my center line, he's in a very, very strong position to start passing. From here, once he takes my leg all the way through and around, he has an excellent chance of passing my guard from this position. Okay? Now, let's understand what are the good points of this guard pass. Well, the first one we've just stated. It's an excellent means of completely undermining my submission offense. Okay? Once my opponent gets two arms underneath my legs, I am cut down to a few low percentage methods of finishing my opponent. So it's an excellent way right off the bat to negate the submissions game if you're the guard passer. Secondly, it gives an excellent ability to take both of my legs to one side of my opponent's body. Just the action of going across my center line with the hand and elevating my hips takes away my ability to be effective in this position. So, let's understand that from my opponent's perspective, a large part of whether he's going to be successful comes down to several things, several key elements. One is his ability to get my leg up between his neck and his shoulder. If my opponent can get my leg into this elevated position, it's very easy for him now to bring my knee forwards towards my head, and from here, start bringing my knee across the center line and into a guard pass. So the first thing he wants to do in these situations is to elevate my leg from his arm up to the shoulder girdle. And from here, he can be very effective. The second big thing he wants to focus on here is hand position. As long as his hands are down by my hips, it's hard for him to actually physically pass my guard. That all changes when his hand changes position across my center line. He can go for a high grip up here, or he can go for a low grip down here. They're both highly effective. The commonality between them is that his hand goes across the center line. And this makes it very easy for him to fold my body. By lifting my hips off the floor, he folds my body so that my knee goes in towards my own head. Once my knee is over my head and his head is over my head, it's so easy for him to put a force across my body that clears my legs to the side. And from here, he's in a very, very strong passing position, and recovery is going to be very difficult. So, we've identified the main elements that Mateus needs to be effective with this guard pass. As you probably guessed, what I want to do is to negate my opponent's ability to engage in the behaviors that made him effective. The first one we're going to look at is denial of our opponent's ability to get our leg from his arm perched up on top of his shoulder. Because the minute my hamstring goes up to his shoulder, things start to take a turn for the worse. So, as soon as Mateus gets underneath my legs here, it's our responsibility to make sure we don't let the leg be taken up to the shoulder. Okay? How are we going to do this? Well, it starts with grip. We're going to take our two hands and we're going to take a 4-finger cuff grip right here to our training partner's sleeves. Okay? This grip is a very, very useful one for preventing my opponent's hands from going across the center line. We're going to use it as a pushing grip. So I'm going to take 4 fingers and I'm going to push down my body here. As Mateus gets strong grips on my gi, when he tries to transfer the hand across the center line, it's very, very difficult for him to do so. When he tries the other side, that too is difficult for him to do so. Whenever I see my opponent trying to put my legs up on the shoulders, I want to keep my legs down here below the shoulders. Now when he goes to lift me in this position and get my hips up off the floor, it's a difficult thing. Okay? If, on the other hand, I lose control of my opponent and he gets the hand across, it's so easy for him to start going into guard passes. So we always want to make sure we fight him first with this grip here on my training partner's cuffs. And we keep the hands and monitor the hands and wrists like so. Now, we want to fight at the legs by taking our weight onto our opponent's arms and getting our legs down the biceps. When he goes to lift and move us now, it's a very difficult thing. Okay, we've got an excellent ability to control him. If my opponent should quickly stand up and lift my hips, he can put my feet over my own head into a position where I'm severely compromised. So let's make sure when our opponent goes to lift us in these situations, we want to make sure our body straightens out. And we put a foot right here in our training partner's bicep. Now when he goes to lift us, we can extend out and away and create situations where it's very difficult for him to get us up into a high stack. So once again, negating our opponent's guard pass. Step number 1, control the hands. Take 4-finger cuff grips. It's illegal for me to put fingers inside the cuffs. So our 4 fingers, I'll just show this on camera. It's illegal for us to put fingers inside and hazardous for your fingers. So we always make sure 4 fingers work on the outside. They find the cut of the cloth, there's stitching running around the outside. We find the stitching and lock in just like so. I take my hands, retract them back, and now I have an effective pushing grip. If he tries to bring a hand towards my chest, we can easily push it off and direct the hand with the heel of our hand. And that's what we're looking to do. So, as my opponent comes in, we get our grip just in like so. Now, when he tries to bring a hand across the center line, it's going to be extremely difficult. When he tries to lift the pants and move me, we always keep our legs down the body. And it's this which enables us to get a foot onto our training partner's bicep. When he goes to lift and move us now, it's a difficult thing. But we can always get feet inside, and from here, start going into our counter offense. So one more time. My opponent gets a hold down here like so. From his perspective, he now wants to bring a hand across the center line. So it's super important that we always go to monitor our opponent's hands through the cuffs. As he goes to move the hand across the center line, it's very, very difficult now. He goes to lift me up. From here, now we have space to get feet in the inside. Even 1 foot is enough. And then from situations like this, we can go into all manner of counter offense. These are some initial reflections on negation of our opponent's ability to get us into compromised position from the double under guard pass. Now, let's go further into the negation of double under guard passes. Sometimes we'll have an opponent who, instead of just grabbing the cloth of our gi, will go further and work to lock his hands. So, we've got an opponent here, and he goes in to lock his hands in this position. Now, this can feel pretty intimidating, because from here it feels like it's almost impossible for me to get my legs off his shoulders down to the area we wanted on his biceps. And as a result, it's pretty easy for him just to pop up to his feet, lift, and then stack me in these positions. So, whenever we see someone with locked hands in this position, it's often a good idea to begin by unlocking his hands. How are we going to do this? Okay, we're going to start by bringing our hips up off the floor, just like so. And then from here, I'm going to take 2 thumbs thumb posting and put them underneath my training partner's wrists. This is easy because I elevated my hips. If I fail to elevate my hips, it's very, very hard for me to penetrate with the two thumbs underneath the wrists. So our whole thing is, as soon as he gets his hands locked, is to bring our hips off the floor. And in this way, we can get a hold of the wrists. Then we engage in a shimmying action where I take my hips from one side to the other. And as a result, I can bring one knee through my training partner's legs. And now we're back in a guard retention situation where we can no longer control both of my hips. Again, if he controls both of my hips and pulls me up into a stack, a lot of people are going to find it very hard to defend the guard from this position. So our whole thing, as soon as you feel his hands lock, are going to be to elevate our hips, to expose the bottom of his wrists so that my thumbs go in very easily. Now as Mateus locks on tight, tight, tight and goes to control my guard, from here I engage in a shimmying action that brings one knee through. Once one knee is through, the cat's out of the bag. Okay? I don't have to bring both knees through. Just one is fine. And then from here, when he goes to pass, we're in a position now where we can go back into our usual guard retention strategies and go to work. Okay? So this is an excellent way to deal with the problem of locked hands. Now, sometimes your opponent won't have locked hands, but from a situation where he's sitting up, he starts to thread one hand underneath my leg like so. As soon as we see a hand coming through underneath, it's always a good habit for us to bring the leg up and pommel through underneath. So every time we see a hand coming through, we pommel the leg through and we beat his position. He's looking to get his hand to my hip. His hand to my hip. That's always what he's looking for. Okay? So as I see the hand reaching for the hip, we always learn to pommel on through, and now we're in a position where we can get into counter offense. If my opponent does get the hand to the hip, then from here the onus is on us to shrimp our body out. And as a result, we can come through and into our counter offense. So there's two kinds of pommeling action here. One is an early pommel where he comes through and we pommel and beat him to the punch. The second is a late pommel where he gets a grip on us. Now we have to shrimp our hips out, bring knee to chest, and we're back in a position where we get into counter offense. If we're very late and my opponent gets through with two hands and then locks his hands, now we have to go into late offense where we get our two thumbs underneath our training partner's wrists. We shimmy until one knee comes through, and now we're back in a position where we can get back into the guard defending game. Done in this fashion, you can clearly see that there are different tiers of defense to this very popular form of guard pass. Once we can negate what our opponent needs, we can hold them off and get back into a situation where we can get into an offensive cycle. Now we're looking at one of the most popular and one of the most effective forms of guard passing, double underpassing. We're looking at how to negate the various aspects of this guard pass. Let's look now at one of the most effective ways to undermine the effectiveness of a double under guard pass so we can retain our guard against resistance. This is the so-called elbow posting method. Okay, understand that whenever someone goes to employ double underpassing, their hand has to go across the center line. They have a choice between going high, the most popular grip, this is the one most people use, or going low, like so. Which one they choose is up to them, so we should be effective against both. Now, in situations like this, it's a good thing for Mateus to bring the hand across the center line. If we were able to stop him from doing so by controlling the sleeve cuff, it's very difficult for your opponent to employ a double underpass and successfully get through. It can be done, but it's hard work. But things become a lot easier for my opponent if his hand passes my center line, and from here he goes into to start the usual guard passes. Whenever we see this, understand that when the hand passes the center line, it comes at a price. And that price for Mateus is here, elbow exposure. What I want to do is get a grip on my training partner's elbow. So I take 4 fingers and I thrust them in as an initial grip, just like so. Alternatively, you can go without gripping the gi and just post the heel of your hand on his elbow here. Okay, so whether you go 4 finger or heel of the hand, I leave that up to you. They're both excellent options. Now, as Mateus goes to pass my guard, we're going to bring our hips up off the floor, just like so. Okay? That's very important. If I stay with my body in a folded position, it's hard for me to hit the move we're about to look at. So the most important thing as Mateus's hand passes my center line is we get our grip and we bring our hips up off the floor. And then in one motion, we can send our opponent's arm straight on through. And from this position, we can always scoot and put our opponent back in guard. And very often, when we use this method, there's not even a need to come up to a power prop position. Very often, we can simply expose our training partner's elbow, and then from here, push our knee through and slip the knee inside. Okay? And then from here, we're back in a good retention position. I'll demonstrate it from a different angle. Mateus gets into a position where he goes across my center line and controls the cross lapel like so. So from here, we post on our training partner's knee and we bring everything up off the floor. My hips coming up off the mat. So I curl my foot down and lift my pelvis. Now I start exposing my training partner's elbow and my knee slips back inside and prevents him from passing. Alternatively, from here we can go the extra distance, and then from here we can sit up and push away on our training partner's arm and then scoot our hips back and realign our body with our opponent. This can be a very, very effective way of stopping our opponent from going and effectively passing with double unders. So from a situation where he goes through and starts to cross the center line, with our hips come up, and from here, we're in a good position now to go back and face our opponent. We can go with a less extreme version of it, where from here, the hips rise, and we just push and bring our knee back inside our opponent's elbow, and we're back in guard. So we often make use of this general method. As Mateus goes underneath our legs, look how from here, we can use this action of slipping the knee inside. Every time he goes underneath the leg, it starts to go across the center line. It's a more difficult thing for us to start coming up. And now we're back in an offensive cycle from where we can start going into counter offense. Often make use of this as a method of negating an opponent's attempt to pass with double underhooks. Now we're looking at the specific methods of countering a specific guard. A specific guard pass. We're looking first at the double underguard pass, probably the most commonly seen form of guard pass at fundamental level, and a method which works all the way up to world championship level. Very, very effective means of passing guard. We're looking at a range of ways to neutralize and counter this, and so we can get back into an offensive cycle out of a defensive cycle. Let's look now at shoulder walking. Your opponent's intention, once he comes through here and crosses the center line with his hand, is to fold your body. His intention is to bring your knees towards your head and get his head over yours. And as a result, my body is folded in a way where it's pretty easy for my opponent to start passing here by exerting a force across my center line and passing my guard. So, whenever I see someone who's done a good job of stacking my body here, one thing we can get into is the idea of shoulder walking, where I want to extend my legs down towards my training partner's biceps and walking backwards on my shoulders so that distance increases between my head and his head. The moment someone goes into a stacking situation, I always want to create situations where I can walk backwards on my shoulders. And as a result, I can start bringing feet back inside my training partner's body. What I don't want is my shoulders stationary and my knees going over my own head. That's going to create a real problem. So, one way we can negate this to some degree right from the start is self-framing. I put a frame, hand on my own thigh, elbow on the mat. When he goes to fold my body now, there's some resistance. So it's more difficult for him to do so. Then we put a hand on our training partner's hip, just like this. And then our hips come up, and we start the action of walking backwards on our shoulders. And as a result, we're able now to pommel our legs through and around and start going back into some form of counter offense. Again, from Mateus's perspective, he's always looking to create a folded body. And if he can bring my hips up and my knees directly over my head, that's exactly what he's successfully done. And from here, defending the guard is going to be quite a trick. So, in these situations, we're looking to frame ourselves, frame our opponent's body here, and as he comes up to fold our body, it won't be quite so easy now. When we feel we can start pushing back on our training partner, usually by taking our leg down towards the bicep, that's when we can start walking backwards in our shoulders and increasing the distance between his head and my head. And then from here, we can start pommeling legs in, so that it won't be so easy for our opponent to go into that double under position and resume his guard passing. Now, we've been looking at how to negate the powerful passing effects of a double under guard pass. We've seen a range of different methods that we can employ. Let's look now at putting all those techniques together into a coherent package so that you can use this tomorrow when you're training in the gym. We'll start off with a training partner on 2 knees. Usually, most of the time, when our opponent goes into double under passing, it's from a situation where they're down on their knees, at least when they first go into enter. They can stand up to their feet afterwards, but typically the initial engagement is down here on the knees. So from a situation where we start off like so, as soon as I see my opponent reaching through underneath my legs, I'm immediately looking to pommel my legs through. Every time he reaches in, we're always looking to pommel legs. If he gets further in and gets a hold of my belt, then we'll look at the idea of shrimping and pommeling. Every time he gets through to a belt, look how we always get out to the side and shrimp and pommel in. As our opponent gets further underneath and secures grips underneath, we're always looking to control our training partner's hands. As he goes to pass from this position, we can thread legs inside, put feet inside, pommel, go around into our various forms of counter offense. As our opponent gets a hand across the center line, from here, there's many ways for us to start negating our opponent's ability to pass. As he gets back through underneath and takes us up into higher and higher stacks. From here, we're always looking to walk back and get legs back inside our opponent, back into counter offense. As our opponent gets underneath our legs and goes into lock his hands, we're always looking to shrimp our legs through. And as he spontaneously works in these situations, we can use all the methods that we looked at in tandem to hold off an opponent who's going into pass with double unders. Learn to use those methods in combinations. Never just surrender a folded body to your opponent. The moment you feel the hands coming under, recognize that there's some early defenses in terms of pommeling, some later defenses as we post on our training partner's elbow, and some very late defenses as we walk backwards on our shoulders. But ultimately, they're designed to prevent our opponent getting his hands underneath and across the center line and our body into a folded position. Okay, let's go on now to our next method of passing guard and how to negate it. This is the over-under guard pass. Let's look first at what are the various strengths and weaknesses of the over-under guard pass. The idea behind the special or specific approach to guard retention is that we identify what form of guard pass is being used against us, we identify its principal strengths, and then attack its weaknesses. The over-under guard pass is one of the more popular methods of passing guard, and in my opinion, one of the absolute best and most effective methods. The strong points of this method, because I get in very close to my training partner's hips and lock into a good position, it's very, very hard for my opponent to get any kind of submission attacks from this position. Okay? It's very hard for my opponent to off-balance me from here. You're so tight into your training partner's hips that there's very little he can do in terms of counter offense while you're engaged in the passing activity. Understand something about this motion. It's reliant principally upon a firm control of one of your opponent's legs that puts your opponent's leg between your two legs. Okay? If my opponent's leg is on the outside, that's obviously going to screw up a over-under guard pass. So we need one foot inside our legs. We need one arm underneath our training partner's far leg, and we lock in to a position where we come up off our knees. Everything is held in place by my head position. My head goes over my training partner's hip and locks me into position just like so. So come up into a high tripod. Now we have an excellent ability to continue to stuff our training partner's leg between ours, and from this position, we can do all of our passing. The chief characteristics of the over-under guard pass then are built around the idea of putting one of my opponent's legs between my legs and locking everything in place via my head position. The strengths of the pass come from the positioning of both of my shoulders. One shoulder will be directly onto my training partner's diaphragm. The other shoulder will be inside my training partner's hips. So when he tries to turn in and face me, my right shoulder makes it very difficult. When he tries to move around the mat, my weight through my left shoulder makes it difficult. And in a situation like this, it won't be difficult for us to capture our training partner's leg, carry it across the center line, and ultimately from here, back step out of our training partner's legs and go into a strong pass. So the central features behind the over-under pass are this idea of one leg caught between ours and our head position over our opponent's hip, solidifying my two shoulders in place, one inside his thigh and one on his diaphragm. So head position and the trapping of one leg are the key features of the over-under guard pass that make it such a difficult thing to defend against. With that in mind, as the person trying to retain guard, let's have a look now at our first method of shutting down an over-under guard pass and retaining our guard against its effects. Okay, we have an opponent who's gotten a hold of our D-pants on the outside, and they've done a good job of putting my foot between their legs, and they're starting to drive up now. We know that everything in the over-under guard pass begins with the lead shoulder. The lead shoulder comes down and locks in place. That's what puts weight onto my body. What keeps the shoulder in place is his head position over my hip. And then a good firm grip on the belt with the hand underneath my thigh locks everything in place, so I feel like I'm completely stuck. And once I'm in this position, there's very little in terms of guard offense that I can play. And so one of the chief characteristics you'll see with over-under guard passing is people will hold this position for long periods of time. The guy on bottom can't really get any kind of effective counter offense going. He's feeling his opponent's weight the whole time. And eventually you get these long drawn out exchanges where ultimately the guy on top passes and scores points. So an obvious question here is, okay, well, as the bottom person, what should I be looking to do? Well, we've identified the central features of the position, that control of the leg and the position of the lead shoulder, rear shoulder, and the head that locks everything in place. So our whole thing is to fight the over-under guard pass at the lead shoulder, since that's the part of my opponent's body that's going to lead the way into the pass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the heel of my hand. I'm going to post it right here in my training partner's shoulder. As Mateus goes to drive forward, I stiff arm just long enough that I can place my hand in here as a cross collar grip. This is designed to stop my opponent's shoulder coming to my center line. If Mateus can get his shoulder to my center line, that's a serious problem. And now the over-under pass has been locked. So our first thing is we deny his shoulder getting to the center line. So we lock one and we put the hand in two, just like so. This gives me an excellent block of the lead shoulder, but it hasn't yet resolved the problem of the right shoulder, the rear shoulder, inside my thigh. As long as that's inside the thigh, my opponent can shake his head left and right, and eventually he'll start to break through with that lead shoulder. So once we've secured this grip here, now I've got to go in and secure the rear shoulder. I'm going to do that by hipping out and bringing my knee as a wedge right there in front of my training partner's shoulder. So I form something rather like a V frame between my knee and my elbow here. When my opponent goes to drive forward now, it's exceptionally difficult for him to get the necessary head position required to make an over-under guard pass work. And this is going to give us an ability now to substitute my foot for my shoulder. My foot just comes in like so. Once the foot comes in, the cat's out of the bag. As he tries to drive forward now, it's a very, very difficult thing. And it's a relatively easy thing for us at this point to start pommeling our leg through and around on our training partner. Once this leg comes in, I just push off my training partner's hip, I kick through, and now even the most basic requirement of the over-under guard pass, that my foot be between his legs, has been taken away from my opponent. When we lock up a closed guard in the situation, now we're ready to play from offense from bottom position. Once again, We start off with an opponent who does a good job of dominating the leg through the gi pants. We know now it's only a matter of time until my opponent stuffs the leg and starts to bring the shoulder forward and go into the over-under guard pass. So our first thing is we post the shoulder, okay? Don't just try to get your hand in here, because when the shoulder's coming forward aggressively, you'll get crushed before you get an effective block. So first, start with a stiff arm frame. When he goes to drive forward, that will give you sufficient time to get your cross grip in place. Okay? Now, we shift out and we bring our knee as a V block between my left forearm and my left knee. When my opponent tries to bring the head forward into the over-under position, it's almost impossible. And this is going to make it possible for us now to shift out a little bit further and get our foot all the way up to our training partner's lead shoulder. Now, he can drive as hard as he wants. It's going to be almost impossible to go forwards. And it won't be a difficult thing for us now to start pommeling legs inside. And from here, we kick through and end up in a closed guard or any version of open guard you like from that position. At the conclusion of the move, you will find your opponent no longer has even the most basic prerequisite of over-under guard passing, which is your leg stuffed between his legs. Let's look at this from a different angle. From a situation where Mateus does a good job of controlling my leg and stuffing my foot between his legs. From here, he gets a hold of my belt. It's no secret what's coming next. He's under one of my legs, he's over the other, and he has the grips required for the over-under position. So at this point, the cat's out of the bag. We know now what's coming next. It's going to be the over-under guard pass. We post on the shoulder. As he goes to drive forward, that gives me sufficient time to put my hand in as a cross-collar frame. Now, I shift my hips and bring my knee in front of my opponent's shoulder. As he goes to drive forward in this position, this forms a very, very effective frame and prevents my opponent getting the critical head position, which makes the over-under guard pass work. From this kind of general situation, we now take our foot and pull our foot onto our training partner's shoulder. This gives us even greater potential to push the head and shoulders back in a way where we can easily extract our bottom leg. Once the bottom leg comes through, it's an easy thing to pummel our legs into position and finish up in closed guard. Because we finish in closed guard, my opponent doesn't even get a chance to perform a second over-under guard pass because he no longer has my foot between his two legs. Let's have a look at that again from a slightly different angle. My opponent catches my leg, stuffs the foot between his legs. He goes under and over, so we know now what's coming next. As he goes to drive forward, we stiff arm the near shoulder. I take my hand through, I take a cross lapel grip, push my body, and place my knee in so both shoulders are blocked. One is blocked by my knee, the other is blocked by my cross lapel grip. When he tries to drive the head into the critical position required for the over-under guard pass, it's a very difficult thing indeed. And as a result, from this position, we can start taking our foot and making an even stronger block. Because my foot is in good driving position here, blocking my opponent's head and shoulders, it's not a difficult thing to extract the bottom leg. We pommel through and find ourselves in a position where now both of our legs are outside of our opponent's legs. There's not even an opportunity for my opponent to go back into the same pass and try and break through. This is a very effective way of shutting off the over-under guard pass in the early stages before my opponent gets good head position. Now let's go further into the special or specific theory of guard retention, where we're starting to look at specific methods of passing the guard and how to counter those specific methods rather than the general method of guard retention, where we just look at any form of guard pass and we gave a set of broad principles and techniques to work with to defend against any guard pass. We're looking now at the over-under guard pass. We just saw the idea of blocking the lead shoulder and then working off control of our opponent's shoulder and head position, essentially denying him head position so that he couldn't get the over-under pass to work. Let's look now at a situation where your opponent does get shoulder position. He's gone further into it. Maybe you're a little bit late, a day late and $1 short, and he got good shoulder position, and we still need to be able to defend ourselves. So, like any over-under guard pass, it starts with control of my foot. My opponent stuffs it between his legs, and he starts to drive forward. I would love it if we could just block that shoulder and prevent it ever touching the center line. In the previous move, that's exactly what we saw how to do, okay? But now this time Mateus does get his shoulder in towards the center line. Once the shoulder makes the center line, you know what's next. He's going to take his head and he's going to lock his shoulder in place by putting his head over the jaw just like so. From here, I'm going to take my left hand and I'm going to get a hold of my training partner's cuff right here at the sleeve. Now, from Mateus's perspective, what he wants to do is cover my knee. If he can go forward and take his hip over my knee, that's going to be a problem for me. And it's from there, when he covers the knee, that ultimately he's going to walk towards my center line, backstep his right leg, and that's where the guard pass starts to occur. That's when things start getting really tough to defend. So, as Mateus gets his shoulder in good position and goes over my knee, I'm going to take my foot, I'm going to hook over his knee with my right foot, just like so. As my right foot makes the connection at the knee, I'm going to draw everything inwards. In one motion, we're going to hit a knee lever technique, where I take my right foot down towards the mat and I lever my right knee into my opponent's body, just like so. And at the same time, I hold on to my training partner's elbow. As a result, Mateus now must go to recover his position. But as he does so, my foot extracts. And the one thing he badly needed for the over-under guard pass, which is my foot stuffed between his legs, is now being taken from him. And as a result, we're in a position now to not only shut down the over-under guard pass, but even go into counter offense. We now have a trap triangle, and from here, many triangle opportunities. Most of your opponents will quickly read that this is a bad situation for them, and they will make a switch from an over-under guard pass and bring the second hand in, and you'll end up usually back in some form of closed guard. So let's have a look at this again. We have an opponent who does a good job of getting in and getting the D-pads, and even gets the shoulder all the way up to the center line. We take our left hand and we grip here at the sleeve cuff. From this position, he goes over my knee, like so. He's doing all the right things, okay? That's exactly what he should be doing to hit this over-under guard pass. Now, we're going to bring everything in towards the floor. We're going to lever off the floor and bring him over. I pull up on my training partner's elbow so I can free my leg. Now, probably my opponent, if he has any sense whatsoever, will pommel his arm in, and we end up back in a closed guard situation, ready to go to our counter offense from closed guard. Let's have a look at this move from another angle. We have an opponent who successfully stuffs our leg, and they have the over-under position. Not only do they get the leg in place, they get the shoulder and head in place. So they've gone further into the over-under guard pass. I take my hand, I take sleeve cuffs just in here. Now, as Mateus walks over my knee, I take my foot and I drive down towards the floor. I hold on to his elbow and I lever over with my knee. Now I extract my leg. He's probably going to pull his arm free and pommel back in, otherwise there's an obvious triangle attack there. And now we're back in the safety of closed guard. One more time. Mateus does a good job controlling my leg, stuffs it between his. He has the perfect over-under position and starts driving forward over my knee. Now, from here, I bring my foot down, and we lever everything over to bump him over. Now, from this position, so many ways for us now to get into counter offense. Here we're looking at a triangle, but worst case scenario, your opponent pulls his hand back in, you'll find yourself in closed guard. Okay, we've identified the central problem posed by the over-under position is the idea of my opponent stuffing one of my feet between his legs and then getting his lead shoulder to my center line and locking everything in place with head position. Your opponent's head position over your hip is what locks his two shoulders into those dangerous attacking passing positions that make the over-under guard pass such a big threat. Let's look now at another means of retaining our guard against this kind of strong direct pressure, even when our opponent does have good head position. So, again, Mateus does a good job of controlling one of my feet between his legs. He does a good job of bringing the shoulder down here towards the center line and locking up in place like so. Now it's going to be a battle between my ability to keep my knee from being put underneath his hips and his ability to come forward and capture my knee. Often there'll be a vociferous battle here as we try to push people back, etc., and he goes advancing over my knee like so, okay? Whenever we see ourselves in this position, one thing we can always attempt to do, and this is a very good way to counter this position in general, is to move his head to the other side. Now, that sounds easy, just move his head. But in reality, it's never going to be easy because your opponent has all of his weight in a good tripod position and the head locked in. He'll be curling his head in, using the strength of his neck to lock everything in place over my hips. So just pushing on the head and shoulders in general doesn't do a lot of good here. Okay, so what are we going to do? I'm not going to push his head. I'm going to hold it. I'm going to take my forearm and hold his head just like so. Now, even though I weigh more than Mateus, it might make a strong body here, Mateus, I would not be physically strong enough to move his head with my arms here. But one thing I can do is extend my body and move myself around his head. So if I can't move him, I'll move myself around him. So I push off this knee before he gets a chance to cover it. And at the same time, I straighten my body out. And as a result, I didn't move his head as I moved my body around him. Okay? Once we get into that kind of situation, we're going to be able to perform what we call a head cover, where I come up like so, and I get a hold of my training partner's belt, and I cover my training partner's head. Now, when Mateus tries to bring his head back, it's almost impossible. Even if Mateus passed my guard now, I'll let him pass. His head and his hips are on one side of my body. He'll never get a clean pass until his head and his hips are on different sides of my body. As long as his head and his hips are on the same side, there's no guard pass. Okay? With that in mind, let's look at how we can use this. So, Mateus stuffs our leg. Starts the action of driving around the corner. Before he can get over my knee, I block the head and I move my own body around the other side. I bring my elbow in place and we get a good grip to sit like so. Now I use my leg like a pendulum to come up and we get our head cover in place. From the head cover, many things for us to do, but a very simple one from here is a variation of sumigaeshi or hook sweep, where I turn my training partner down by taking the gi pants, make a strong base here, Mateus, and we just tilt our training partner down to a shoulder. I just take my right foot and we bump our training partner down to a shoulder. Now, put our hand on the floor, we come up, and we're in a good position to work from here. Once again, we have an opponent who's done a good job of controlling the lower leg like so. From here, he's doing all the right things to drive forward and make for a very strong passing opportunity. Before he gets over my knee, we take the head, immobilize it, and move ourselves across so that his head gets caught underneath our tricep. Now from here, we're in a position to start sitting up and forward. Okay? How things go from here depends upon our opponent's reaction. If my opponent tolerates this head position, it's very easy for me to tilt him over, even if he puts legs out wide for base. So it's always possible to use this belt grip to take him straight over to his hip. Okay? So what do you think your opponent's going to have to do? He's going to have to bring his head back to the center. When he brings his head back to the center, there's no reason why my lower leg can't move. And as a result, we end up, probably he'll take this arm out now, back in variations of closed guard, open guard, etc. Okay? We can often use this simple method to retain guard against even a strong over-under guard passer. So he does a good job of controlling my leg in, just like so. First things first, we want to get around his head. So we block it and we straighten out our body and bring my tricep over to the other side. His head has gone from my center line to the outside position out by my sideline. Now from here, we lock onto the belt. We use our second leg as a pendulum and we come up to a seated position. I create a dilemma. The first horn of the dilemma involves putting my foot out. Even if Mateus puts his legs out wide for base, you'll always be able to tilt them over to the side of his head. Okay? So he has to take his head back. And when he does so, there's no reason why we can't bring legs out and go back into some form of guard where he's going to have to go to a completely different guard pass now. One more time from a different angle. We have an opponent who comes forward and stuffs the leg. Gets into strong over-under guard passing grips. From here, we block the head. We move everything over to the side. And from here, we come up to a seated position. Our dilemma now is between a drop that puts him down to a hip, or if he wants to avoid that, he's got to fight for head position. As he brings his head back to the center, space develops between us, And as a result, it's pretty easy for us now to go back into any variation of guard. Sometimes if your opponent's sloppy, even go into triangles, etc., etc. That'll be up to the skill level of your opponent. So this is a simple way to manipulate head position and create a dilemma where your opponent has to bring his head back in a way which gives you guard retention. Now we're looking at the idea of retaining our guard against strong over-under guard passing. One of the more obvious features of the over-under position is it's a strong driving position where your opponent goes into a high tripod and commits almost 80 to 90% of their body weight forward into your hips. That's an intimidating drive, and you feel the weight and pressure when you're the person defending guard. Let's look at a way we can use that weight and pressure against our opponent. Let's say our opponent gets everything. So now we're late in the sequence. Our opponent's pinned the leg. They've got head position, and now they're even going over the knee. So as it goes over the knee, at this point, it's like, wow, this is very, very bad indeed. Your opponent's 90% of the way to passing your guard at this point. All that's required now is a back step. And then from here, you're very close to being pinned. When we see things have gone this far into the guard pass, an excellent late defense to the over-under guard pass is a roll through, where we get a grip here on our training partner's gi pants. And at the same time, we get a grip here on our training partner's belt. As I contest the gi pants, my opponent will start walking further and further into the pass. We're going to make a switch onto our training partner's sleeve. Now, just move your leg a little bit. Remember that it is illegal for me to start putting fingers inside my training partner's gi sleeves. So let's make sure we grip properly on the outside of the cuff. And our primary focus here is on putting his hand in towards our hamstring. Once I get this grip on the cuff of the sleeve and my training partner's belt, I just play a waiting game. I can even relax my leg. As my opponent goes to pass my guard, from here, we're going to focus on changing our head position so that my ear walks in towards my training partner's hips, just like so. And we're in the perfect position now to roll our training partner through in the same direction as his drive and take him over. He will have to come back up to his base at this point. As he comes back up to his base to recover, we now find ourselves back in a situation where we're back in guard. Once again, my opponent gets all the prerequisites to a good over-under guard pass. Shoulder goes to center line, head locks in place, and he beats my knee. Initially from here, I make a play for the belt, like so. Then I take my hand and I lock all the way through and get a hold of my training partner's sleeve all the way down by the cuff. As my opponent goes to back step out of my legs, I want to focus on head position. I get a high elbow and I start walking across my opponent's body, and from here, a big bridge sends him over. As he goes to recover, no one wants to be swept after all. We find ourselves back in an open guard situation, ready to play. One more time. My opponent locks up. We get a hold of our training partner's sleeve at the cuff and grip here at the belt. As my opponent goes through, we want to create almost like a north-south effect and turn the man over. As he comes up to recover his base of support, we now find ourselves back in an offensive cycle where we're ready to start playing an open guard game. This is an excellent late defense to our opponent's over-under guard pass.